Hi, I'm Bob, and welcome to Between the Sheets, where we look at Microsoft Excel and related technologies. Believe it or not, Excel has 6 functions to round numbers. Why the heck does it need so many? You might wonder why it needs any at all. Doesn't Excel have those 2 buttons on the ribbon bar? Well, those buttons on the ribbon bar only increase or decrease the number of decimals that get displayed, and they're only formatting anyway. They don't change the underlying number that Excel calculates. And if you want to round whole numbers, there are no buttons for that. There's a lot of control you have with these functions. So let's take a look, see how it works. Let me start off by showing you the functions we're going to look at. You'll notice some of these are just opposite sides of the same coin. That's going to make it easier to learn them. The round function is straightforward. Feed it a number with decimals and tell it how many decimal places to round off to. And it always rounds away from 0, so if you round a negative number, it will work just like a positive number, but with a minus sign. If you use the round function with a whole number, it won't do anything. So let's take a look at the syntax for the round function. It's pretty straightforward. We say equals round, feed it the number that we want to round, and the number of digits that we want to round off to. So here's a couple of examples. If we say equals round and feed it some pi and tell it we want to round off to 3 decimals, we get 3.142. If we have negative pi, I don't like the idea of negative pi, I want pi, and we tell that to round off to 3, we're going to get negative 3.142. So you see it's rounding off away from 0. Let's do some examples. See down column A, we have a column of numbers. They all have 5 decimal places. Let's round them all off to 3 decimal places. So I'm going to start at the top of column B, and I'm going to say equals round, open up the parenthesis, and I'm going to say, okay, there's the first one, comma, round it off to 3, close the parenthesis. That's really all we need. Control Enter or Command Enter on the Mac, and there it is, and I'm going to double click the autofill handle. And there we go. And when you look down, you can see that this is a regular round. So like the first one here, that's a 1 in the 4th position, so that remains at 2. Or here's this one that has an 8 in that 4th position, so that rounds off to 7, and so forth. And you notice that we have these negative numbers, and these negative numbers are rounding away from 0. So they look just like positive numbers, but with minus signs in front of them. To force all numbers to round upwards, we use the round up function. Also, the syntax is pretty straightforward. We say equals round up, give it the number we want to round, and also how many digits do we want to round off to. So a couple of examples here. If we take pi and we want to round up to 2 decimals, it gives us 3.15 rather than a regular round would be 3.14. And if we have it as a negative, and we round up negative pi to 2 decimals, again we get negative 3.15. Now the opposite side of that coin is the round down function that forces all numbers to round downward. Syntax is the same thing, just equals round down, feed it a number, and tell it how many digits to round off to. So a couple of other examples. Same thing if we feed it some pi and we say, round down to 3 decimal places, that's going to take what would normally be 3.142, but it rounds it down to 3.141. If we have negative and we round the negative pi off to 3 decimals, that gives us negative 3.141. So let's go use that in the sheet. I'm going to scroll over here a little bit. So we're going to say equals round up. There's the first one, comma, 3 decimals, close the parenthesis. And there it is. Let me scroll over a little bit more. Get that other column out of the way. So there it is, rounded up. So this number, rounded up, would normally be 2.302, but because we're using round up, it's forcing it to be 2.303. Let's go and double click the autofill handle. And there we go. You see everything here, whether it would normally go or not, is rounded up on that 3rd decimal. So let's do the round down. Same thing, grab that, comma, 3 places, close the parenthesis, and double click the autofill handle. So you see this first one here was rounded up to 2.303. This is rounded down to 2.302, and so on. Or there's a negative number rounded up to the 7 in the third position or rounded down to the 6 in the third position. Let's take a look at the other 3 rounding functions, which are a little different. The mround function will round to the nearest multiple of a number. So there's a syntax equals mround, feed it the number, and then rather than telling it how many decimals, we tell it what the multiple is. So, for example, if you want to round to a multiple of 3, the numbers you're rounding off will become multiples of 3, like 9, 12, 15, and so on. And the numbers will round either up or down depending on what's closer to that multiple. So here's a few examples. If we mround 11 to a multiple of 3, well, 12 is the closest multiple of 3, so that 11 is going to get rounded up to 12. If we mround 11 to multiples of 5, well, the closest multiple of 5 to 11 is 10, so it's going to round down. Let's do some of those. So in this tab, we can use these numbers to round to multiples. So I'm going to go into that first one. I'm going to say equals mround that first one, and I want to round that off to multiples of 3. Enter that. Okay, so the closest multiple of 3 that's next to 8 is 9. Let's double click that autofill handle. And we can see down column B, these are all multiples of 3. So 23 is close to 24. 18 is already a multiple of 3, so there's nothing to round off to. The same for 12. 20, also the closest is 21, and so on. Now the ceiling function has the same syntax and does basically the same thing, except just like the round up function, the numbers round away from 0. Higher for positive numbers, lower for negative numbers. So here's the syntax, and the syntax is going to be a little different depending on whether you have a newer or older version of Excel. If you have a newer version of Excel 365, the function is going to be called ceiling.math. If you have a slightly older version, the function is simply going to be called ceiling. The rest of the syntax, the inputs are the same. You feed it a number, tell it what multiple you want, just like with the mround function. So a couple of examples, if we give it a ceiling and feed it 13 and tell it to round off to a multiple of 3, well, 13 is closest to 12, so that's the result that we're going to get. If we do a ceiling of 11 with a multiple of 5, so the closest upwards to 11 is 15. Now, just like round down is the opposite of round up, the floor function is the opposite of ceiling. Makes sense, doesn't it? Also, like with the ceiling function, the newer edition of the function is called floor.math, and older versions are simply called floor. Syntax is just the same, either floor or floor.math. Feed it a number, tell it what multiple you want. So if we want a floor of 14 with a multiple of 3, well, 14 is closest downwards to 12. Or if we tell it equals floor of 14 with a multiple of 5, the closest multiple of 5 downwards from 14 is 10. Let's do a few of those. Scroll over here. I'm going to say equals ceiling. You notice I'm running the latest version of Excel, so I have the choice. It prefers that I use ceiling.math, but notice under compatibility it's ceiling. So if I'm going to create a sheet for someone who has an older version of Excel that doesn't have the ceiling.math function, I would use plain old ceiling and it would work just great. So I'm going to tell it, okay, ceiling of that, multiple of 3, close parenthesis, enter, and 8 is close to 9, going upwards. And multiples of 3, 23 is close to 24, 18 already is a multiple of 3, so nothing to change. The same for 12, 20 is round up to 21, etc. Let's go and do the floor function. And same thing, I could use floor for compatibility, or if I'm going to stay in the newer version of Excel, I'm going to use floor.math of that. And also I'm going to do a multiple of 3. Enter that just so we can see the difference here between ceiling and floor. So in this case, because we're doing floor, 8 is rounding down to 6 as opposed to rounding up to 9. And 23 is rounding down to 21. 18 and 12, again, they're the same. 20 is rounding down to 18 instead of up to 21, and so on. I'd say that was a pretty well-rounded tutorial, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. I won't quit my day job. So until next time, my name is Bob, and this has been Between the Sheets.